Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special interview. Today we have a returning guest to the show, Egon von Greyerz of Matterhorn Asset Management, located at goldswitzerland.com. And I got to tell you, the last time we had Egon on the show was back in April, and the U.S. federal government was dropping a bunch of money from helicopters all over the country. And sure enough, here at the end of October, they're refueling the helicopters and they're loading the pallets of cash back on them to make another drop. So we got one of the world's leading hyperinflation, inflation, currency destruction, and all things money matters related experts with us to pick his brain today. Egon, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Paul, great to see you again. And yes, certainly it was almost 6 months ago we spoke, and here we are again. And the world is sadly going in the wrong direction from the point of view of prosperity of mankind. But you know, this is what we had expected, and we are as I see the world. And I'm not a pessimist. I'm just someone who analyzes risk. As I see the world, it's going to get a lot worse. And for quite some time, and you know, especially now since more and more of the world is in lockdown phases, and we see no end to that.
Indeed. And, you know, to pick off of what you were just saying there, you know, this morning, Bloomberg's article that they were leading here in the States, and this is the very first sentence of this article about the stimulus negotiations, and it says, after months of on again, off again talks on an increasingly needed fiscal stimulus package. So the mainstream media is like, we got to have this stimulus. We need to have this stimulus. So I just kind of want to start there, Egon, and get your thoughts just about the stimulus and the helicopter money and what's going on. And let me say just one quick thing first. You know, a lot of people that are in debt stopped paying their student loans because they got like forbearance, or I'm not sure how exactly it's called technically. I don't have student loan debt, but they were able to do that. Then we didn't know this until we got a letter from the district, but the entire nation, school kids, are getting free breakfast and lunches during the school day. So that's 10 meals a week free that all U.S. kids are getting. Our kids are even getting it. They just sent an email from the district. There's that eviction and foreclosure moratorium where if you've got like government loans or if you're in government public housing, you can't be evicted or foreclosed on. Then if people lost their jobs, they qualify for Medicaid, which is free health insurance for the poor. They qualify for food stamps. Plus there's the food bank distribution. And now they're about ready to drop another round of helicopter money on the country. And my thoughts are this is just going to be massively inflationary, Egon. So I kind of threw a lot at you there, and I don't really know where you want to take that or what even my question was at that point, other than a rant probably. So thank you with that. But what are your thoughts on the stimulus there, Egon?
Well, Paul, this is not a question of stimulus at all. This is a question of survival. You know, and sadly, even as we both know, and we talked about it many times, the stimulus that they're talking about, which is money printing, which is inevitable, it has to come in bigger and bigger amounts. But we know that that is basically money created out of thin air. We talked about it so many times. And so therefore, it has a temporary effect, but it's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to save the world. So they're doing it for survival because short term, that is the only tool they have in their toolbox, unfortunately. But, you know, you're talking about, you know, there is money for everything. You know, I saw, for example, in the UK now, they're arguing that school children should also be able to go back to school and get meals during the holiday, the Christmas holiday, for example. You know, the situation is totally disastrous. You know, you just talk to friends in the retail field, or talk to friends in the hotel area, talk to friends in the leisure area. You know, the hotels, city center hotels, we take New York, London, or wherever, that used to have 95% occupancy. You know, they don't even have 10% now. You know, this is an absolute disaster, and you know, we're not seeing the end of we don't even know where the end is, because you know, you take here in Europe, you know, the UK is locking down more and more. I mean, the half of the country is now in lockdown, more or less, and it's happening in European countries too, and therefore And we, there is no, initially everyone talked about the vaccine being the solution, and there was a vaccine coming within 6 months, and of course Trump was saying that we soon have a vaccine, etc. Now, I never believed that there has never in history been a vaccine created in 6 months' time. Let's remember that. And there was just a UK official today that said that. A medical expert said that normally it takes 10 years for a vaccine, and 5 years is fast. So now the whole world, governments all around the world, and the Western world especially, but even other regions, have actually thrown money at every pharmaceutical company in order to develop vaccines. A lot of that money will be totally wasted because you will be lucky to find a vaccine. And the influenza vaccines that so far have been successful in that case after many years means maximum 20 to 30% effectiveness. And so that's what maybe we could see after a few years, but this virus is totally different and is mutating all the time, much more difficult than any of the previous influenza. I'm not an expert in any way on this, but you can follow the expert. So what I'm saying is there is no short-term solution here to this problem. And as a matter of fact, everything, as you just said, is getting worse in virtually every country. And therefore, I can't see that, if there isn't a miracle happening, as I've written about Deus ex machina, they dropped, like in the Greek plays, they drop down God from above and he solves everything, like in the old Greek plays. If that doesn't happen, we are going to probably be in a similar situation next summer. So this is a bit frightening. It's frightening for us, everyone is locked in, basically, more or less. Some in Switzerland here, we can move relatively freely with masks. Indoors, we have to have masks everywhere, but not outdoors. So we can move relatively freely. And the problem is getting worse here also, but it's not catastrophic. Nothing is locked down, at least. But overall, most people are, of course, working from home, staying at home, and business is terrible. So coming back to your stimulus, or as I call, survival money, because that's what it is. I mean, this is what now we're going to see in the next few months, and acceleration, because you remember this money printing in this phase, which I call the end of the beginning of the end. It was actually the end of the end. It started in August, September 2019. That had nothing to do with coronavirus, or that was only linked to massive problems in the financial system and with the banks. So that problem is still there now. Then from January, February this year, they got an excuse, and they could really open the money spigots because now the virus became the excuse. But the money is still going primarily to the banking system, and it's not helping industry. Okay, so it's helping to feed a few people and to pay a few people who are not working at it. But what's happening also, of course, that in more and more in the US and in Europe, people are now liking being at home, and they are. And the US has ceased temporarily, at least, the payment to people. But in most countries, they're still getting paid even if they're at home. People start liking it, so people want to be home and not work. And of course, these lockdowns. I mean, there's an incredible dilemma, because on the one hand, you have that the hospital capacity is such that they need to lock down, otherwise they will be overfilled, the hospitals. On the other hand, you are going to lose a lot more lives and also a lot more money by this lockdown in the long run. For example, I heard now in the UK again that there are many more people who've died by not getting care for heart problems, cancer, etc., than the people died in the coronavirus. So wherever you turn, this is an absolute disaster. It's a disaster health-wise. It's a disaster for industries. It's a disaster financially. But if we come back to the consequences in financial markets, yes, money printing will accelerate now at a level that we have never seen before. And there will be whatever we call it, helicopter money, or digital money, whatever they're going to call it. So that there is no way to avoid hyperinflation here over the next year or two. That absolutely has to happen, because everybody says, well, there's still no velocity of money, and the money is not being actually used or spent. Well, we both know that hyperinflation comes from a collapsing or falling currency and then a collapsing currency. And that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a collapsing dollar, and all the other currencies also, but of course they can't all collapse against each other at the same time. So it'll be one at a time, and they will seesaw going down to the bottom. So I think the dollar is next, and I think it's starting to happen, and that's what will create the hyperinflation. I met a few weeks ago. I was in the Italian part of Switzerland, and in a small restaurant near Lugano, a town, in a small town, and there the manager, I think he probably was the owner too. He said he recognized me. Okay, well, that's interesting. Yes, you're the gold man, aren't you? Yeah, I know you. He said, that's on YouTube. I've seen you on YouTube. So that's how you see in a small restaurant somewhere. Anyway, you meet somebody who's seen me before, but that wasn't the point. The point, he said, is he came from former Yugoslavia. And he said to me and to my friends who were there with me, gold is the only solution. I've seen it all. I've seen it, I said. I've been through hyperinflation in Yugoslavia. I've seen how from one day to the next, the money that you got was totally worthless. So as far as I'm concerned, he said the only way to save is in gold, and maybe a little bit of silver also. And so this is 99% of the world, or 99.5% of the world population haven't got any idea about gold, or if they do, they certainly don't own any or save in it. But the people who have been through hyperinflation, they know that owning precious metals, in gold or silver, is the only way to survive. And if the Venezuelans, for example, had done this, saved in gold or silver a few years ago only, they would have been saved from what's happening now. And now they have no food, no money, and it's a disaster. So this is, it's so simple. Just buy an ounce of gold, or a gram of gold for $70, or an ounce of silver for $25, $30, and do that every month. And you will avoid what this man, I bet, from Yugoslavia had been through. And he's never, ever going to not save in gold or silver again. He's not going to have any money in the bank or no cash. So, it's so interesting to meet the people who've actually been through it. And we are going to go through it now, Paul. The world is going to go through it. Nobody believes it. Everybody believes that the central banks will save us again, and there'll be digital money instead, or central bank digital money, or there'll be and there'll be helicopter money, etc. But that would make no difference whatsoever, because it is still going to be fiat money, manufactured money, out of nothing, and money that comes out of nothing is worth nothing, and that's what we're going to see, sadly.
Now, Egon, the first time that money came out, and this was actually before the money came out, we saw all of that panic buying, and it was mostly panic buying of like food and household cleaning products and supplies and paper goods and things like that. But just over the last 6 months, I've noticed a steady decline everywhere I go in all of the major stores that I go. And I'm talking about like, Walmart or Target, or just your main big box stores that a lot of people shop at. And I'm noticing like really, diminished supplies of things. Like there's no ammunition that can be purchased. For some reason, printer ink is hard to find. Fluids for vehicles is hard to find. Electronics are hard to find. There's just example after example after example of things that are becoming like half empty shelves in the store: linens, kitchen appliances. So my question there is, when this next drop of helicopter money comes, and that's like $3,400 for a typical family of four, when this next round of helicopter money comes in, well, I mean, you're already starting with half of the levels of inventory that you had the first time it went around. So that's point number one. And then point number two is, and then that's on top of all of these supply chain disruptions that we've seen all year. So, you're going to have a fresh infusion of cash, and there's already, in my opinion, much less stuff that people are going to be able to spend that on. I don't know if any of that made sense at all, or if you can help clarify my thinking with that, Egon.
No, I mean, that's a major, major concern, and no one is prepared for it. As you say, back in March, there was panic everywhere, and the first thing they bought was toilet paper, as we know. And then groceries, etc. It's going to be much worse next time, and there will be shortages. Not only will there be shortages in the shops and production shortages, but there'll be worldwide shortages of food also, in my view, and link that to inflation and a later hyperinflation, because the hyperinflation will not come in maybe very early on. They'll come in the stock market. Maybe the stock market and property market will go up in the beginning, as they normally do in hyperinflationary stages, but very quickly they will reverse, and there will be implosion in prices of these bubble assets that have been going up for the last 50 years or more. And instead, so you will have these stocks, bonds, and property going down and deflating, and you will have things like food and services inflating and hyperinflating. And you combine what you say already with shortages now, then with also later production shortages, and then high inflation and hyperinflation. That's going to be a disaster, and there will be, like you're seeing it already in as an example in Venezuela. This is what is going to happen to a lot of countries in the West also. Nobody relieves that, and I hate sounding like a prophet of doom and gloom, but I'm just looking at the facts, looking at the risk, looking at history, which is of course our best guide here. And this is why I have to come back to my friend from Yugoslavia that I met in the Italian part of Switzerland, who actually said that, I've been through it. I know it's going to happen. And it is going to happen here also. And we don't know how long it takes. Once, it starts with the currency coming down. And once the currency comes down, it can happen very quickly. I mean, you take in the Weimar Republic in Germany in the early 1920s, it happened so quickly. They went from no inflation to hyperinflation in just over a couple of years, basically. So it is, and at the end, it is very, very fast. So this is, nobody understands how quickly these things can change. And of course, then, all of that will be linked to, as you say, shortages that what we're already seeing now, and imagine what's going to happen next. So I hate to scare people and say that you should have a little bit of reserves of food, etc. But nobody will, of course. People don't believe that it's going to happen, and we saw it. Everybody will say, well, we saw it in March, and everything was all right after a while. And although you're seeing shelves not being full now, that people are not yet, that are not total shortages yet. But that could come, and that will be a disaster, of course.
And it's I'd say it's interesting. I mean, it's sad, really, is what it is, because like we post some articles from one of the writers in Venezuela, that he's actually outside of Venezuela, but he goes to Venezuela frequently. He's Venezuelan, and he writes about the collapse and the hyperinflation there. And I'm pretty sure, I want to say that a dozen eggs, like right now today, are like $20 for a dozen eggs, and it's dollars, right? And like you're earning Venezuelan bolivars that aren't even worth anything. So just that food inflation, yeah, that's a real world right now example. And another point about that is, I asked my mother-in-law, Mexican, how it was living through the devaluation in 1994, where the Mexican government took off 3 zeros from the peso. And she said, well, you know what? It wasn't like anything because by that point, nobody had any savings. So it was just like one day you had, 1,000 peso bill, and the next day it was worth 1 peso. And then the money system just changed in that dynamic. So that's how quick that went there. Which leads me to transition into the next topic, which is kind of about like this so-called reset or a debt jubilee or however you want to call it. And my question is this. So in addition to the stimulus, in addition to people starting to sense shortages, and in addition to prices rising, if people start to think that there's going to be a debt jubilee or that this is, they need to buy stuff because prices are going up, well, then they could even accelerate a further credit expansion on their own, just maxing out credit cards to buy stuff because they know that next month it's going to be more expensive. So that's another dynamic I'm thinking about there. Am I thinking about that clearly there, Egon?
Yes, of course you are. But the thing is, nobody knows what this reset will involve. But what I can say with certainty is that, it's being talked about a lot now. And now we have the IMF coming out and talking about, also reset digital currencies and all of that. First of all, it's not going to happen quickly. If it happens, it's going to take a few years. And secondly, all of that is a diversion. It's not going to be a solution to the problem, because if you create a new system and different currencies or digital currencies, there's still fiat money. There's still money that actually has zero value. They're just calling it something else and restructuring the system, and then also putting the debt in a different pocket somewhere and pretending like it doesn't exist anymore, although it's still there. And obviously there's will never be an ability to repay it. So that reset, I have zero hope in that. Of course, the world will, if and when it happens, there will be euphoria for a few weeks or a few months when this happens. But thereafter, everyone will realize that nothing has changed. The situation hasn't changed. And the next phase will be, which I expect coming in the next few years. I don't know how long it will take, but the next phase thereafter will be a disorderly reset. When money really collapses and money dies, and of course gold and silver will surge, reflecting the death of money, and that will be the real disaster when financial assets implode and the banking system basically fails totally, or I can't see a partial failure, but there will be massive problems in the banking system, and all the bubble assets will also implode totally. So that is the phase that we're going to see now. You never know exactly how we are going to get there, as I said. Governments will obviously try all the tricks in the book, but the thing is, we know that whatever they call it, and whatever fancy names that they use for the new money and the new system, is still the same thing, because it's still going to be an insoluble problem, and they only know one trick, which is printing money. And whether they print it in the current form of dollars or whether they call it digital instead, makes zero difference. It's not going to change anything. And we're going to end up in the same situation. And that situation will necessitate, as I said, an implosion of debt, which will be linked to an implosion of the assets that this debt has financed, which means that, in real terms, all of these assets, stocks, bonds, property, etc., will go down by 95% or more. Many bonds will go down by 100% against gold, because they will go down to zero. A lot of the bonds, since nobody's going to pay the debt and no one's going to be able to afford the interest, and the interest, of course, will go to infinity when bonds go to zero. So that is all part of the process in the next few years. And there is absolutely no way that it can happen in any different form or shape, in my view. It's only a question of how long it takes. And of course, I know that the consequences for the world and for a lot of people will be very, very difficult for quite a few years, because we will have food shortages, we will have production shortages, we will have a lack of money or no money. But it will be a transition, and the transition will be tough. Thereafter, I'm obviously long term. The world has always survived. It'll survive this time too. It's just on a bigger scale now. I took the example now of Yugoslavia. You talked about Venezuela. In the end, every country and the whole world will go through it with a lot of suffering for a period, and this time it will be for an extended period. But then the world will go on, and it will be at a different level to today. You won't have everybody won't have lots of cars, houses, iPhones, iPads, etc. That we don't need in lots of these things. So it'll but there'll be other values which we have talked about before. That to me, the best values are. I'm now spending quite a lot of time in the Swiss Alps, because it's a good place to isolate during the Corona times. Although I go to my office also in Zurich, but nevertheless, and then these are, nature is, as I repeat time and time again, nature is free. It's wonderful, great nature, and fresh air, and wonderful walks in the nature. And then you have, as I said, good friends, good books, good music, and all of that. So we can survive on a lot less than we are surviving today. And so that's the positive side of this. And especially what is important is that these values we have now of the golden calf and materialism, etc., they will go away, and we will come back to proper values, and moral and ethical values will come back again, and so that is a good thing. So the world has always gone in cycles. This is just going to be a bigger cycle. It'll be worse. It'll take longer, and more people will suffer, but it will pass. And out of that, I'm optimistic that a better system will come, and then the cycle will continue. So,
I'm optimistic about that. I'm optimistic about that too, and especially just getting back to simplicity. I can't wait to get back to some simplicity, and hopefully that means a lot less laws and onerous laws and things like that. Switching to gold and silver here, Egon. Since we last spoke, big news coming out about Berkshire Hathaway getting his stake in Barrick Gold, and then I think it was the Ohio Firefighters and Teachers Pension Fund, or I can't remember the exact name, but they're taking out a 5% allocation to gold, to physical gold. And I guess my question to you, Egon, is, your clients have, they have net worths with commas in them, and they make purchases in the 6 and 7 figures of gold. So just from that big picture, big money perspective, what does institutional and big money moving into gold mean for the gold market, Egon?
Yes, that's going to make a massive difference. As you say, I think there was a sign, the Buffett buying Barrick gold stocks, and there was a police and firefighter pension fund in Ohio putting 5%, which is quite remarkable. That was about there's about 800 million. That's the beginning. Of course, when you now first of all, in general, very few people, as we said, 0.5% of what financial assets are in gold today. So nobody owns gold virtually, no individuals, so they have, of course, the more the price goes up, the more they will buy. But then also institutions will need to inflation hedge their assets. They're never going to put a big amount into gold. 5%, like Ohio Police Fund Pension Fund did, that's massive. On average, I would be surprised if we see 1% on average. But all the investment gold in the world today is $2.5 trillion. That's $2.5 trillion, and so therefore, and that's already and if you take and that $2.5 trillion happens to equal 0.5% of world financial assets. So if 0.5% of world financial assets go into gold, that would mean that there is none available, because that is only 2.5 trillion today, and that's all being obviously being taken. And there, as we know, that there is no very little increase in gold production. You talk about just over 1% a year in total gold stock increase. So therefore, pension funds, when they now start, or institutions when they start buying gold, and also the public, there is no way to satisfy the increased demand by making or producing more gold. And the holders of gold now, they are not going to let go of it as gold goes up, certainly not at current prices. So therefore, there's only one way to satisfy the increased demand, which is, of course, by higher prices. And that's what's going to happen. So institution that wants to buy for $1 billion worth of gold, they're not going to get it at $2,000. They will maybe get it at $20,000. So they'll get the same amount invested into gold, but they'll get a tenth of the physical actually gold or in weight that they would get today. And that's the way the market is going to go. And of course, then we haven't even mentioned futures markets and COMEX, etc., where you have these massive paper gold quantities that also has to be covered one day, and there isn't physical for that either. So, but that process will also make gold go up very fast. So that's what we're going to see. I'm not, as you know, I'm not a gold bug or a silver bug. I'm just someone who. So we went in as a company and individually into gold and to silver in order, because we saw that the risks were unacceptable, and the only way to protect you against these risks was, that's a historical fact. You see that what the real protection, and come back to my restaurant owner again, he saw it, the real protection when these collapses of currencies, which happens every so many years in countries or in continent, it always happens. So the only protection, and the people who've been through it, they know it, the only protection is to hold an asset which is historically proven, gold and silver, and which has maintained its purchasing power throughout history, or as long as they have existed. So it's so simple. History tells us. So this is what you got to do. And as I said, you can do it at any level. As I said, you don't have to be rich to own gold and silver, because you can buy. So anybody can afford 1 ounce of, virtually anybody can afford 1 ounce of silver, for example. So that's what we're going to see. And institutions will it'll be hard for them, because they won't be to get hold of gold and silver. This is where we're going to see values in. If gold goes to 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, or 100,000 or more, that depends on the amount of money printed. But if we're going to print as much money as I fear to cover all the debt and all the derivatives in the world are going to explode or implode, then you're talking about very high values here in nominal terms. That doesn't mean that that's the real value, but that is, compared to what your money would be worth, that is real money, because your paper money would be worth less, but this actually gold and silver will maintain the purchasing power. So this is what we will see, and it will be disorderly, but that there is, people will see that there's one. This is gold and silver, precious metals would be one of the few assets that actually people will run to, because that's the only way for them to protect themselves.
And with silver, I know before you called it's not really for widows and orphans, but you just wrote an article and you said it's also the investment of the decade. So Egon, talk to us a little bit about silver. What are your thoughts right now on silver, Egon?
Well, we've primarily during our history in the precious metal, helping people with precious metals, we recommended gold primarily because for the simple reasons that we wanted to protect the widows and orphans, and of course, if you take since the beginning of this century, you have seen enormous swings in silver from down up from $3-4 up to 20, down to 7, up to 50, down to 10, etc. So there are big swings. But now, after the gold-silver ratio reached 130 almost earlier this year, and to me, that was the end of the move. I'm sure that most of your listeners will know what that means. It means that gold price divided by silver price is 130, which means that gold is, against the average, which has been around 15, historical average, means that gold has been incredibly cheap, dirt cheap. Sorry, silver has been dirt cheap in relation to gold. And so now is the time, and that trend has not changed. We're down in the 70s now, having been up to the 130. And I am absolutely convinced that the ratio is on the way to 30, where it was in 2011. It might stop there for a while. That was when silver was 50 and gold was 850, gold was 1920. And then I think we will go to the historical average of 15, maybe to 10, which is the relationship in nature between gold and silver, and it might even overshoot more than that. So take your pick. Is gold goes to 10,000 and it goes to 10, the ratio that is $1,000 silver. If gold goes to 100,000, it'd be $10,000 silver, etc. And I don't think this. It sounds sensational, and nobody believes that this is possible. But you have to just think about the supply and demand situation. There's a massive shortage of silver in the world, and right now, about 66% of silver is taken up by industrial use. And that's likely to increase, especially with solar panels, etc. Even the world has problems. Solar panels going to be continued to be manufactured, and then you have 25% taken up by jewelry of silver. So that gives of the production that takes you to 90%. Industrial and jewelry, that takes you to 90%. It's only 10% left, and then there's scrap, of course. Also, there's some scrap, and so there are already shortages of silver now, and production is not going to be increased. So when actually the demand starts increasing for precious metals, and silver will become poor man's gold, of course. So a lot of people will pile into silver for investment purposes. So the silver price, is going to be the most enormous squeeze in silver, and the silver price can go anywhere basically. And again, remember, I'm not a gold bug or a silver bug. I'm just someone who analyzes the situation, the risk, supply and demand, and the economic and financial situation in the world. And the consequence is very clear. No one can tell where it's going to go. No one before 1923 in Germany could have forecast that gold would reach 100 trillion, I think it was, at the gold price. It means nothing in inflation terms, but it means something to the ones who stayed in paper money, because they would have lost it all. So it could go to levels that we haven't got a clue about. So, but that's not the point. I'm not recommending gold and silver in order to make money. We are recommending it, and so are you. It's just about wealth preservation, protecting your wealth. That's all we're talking about. Don't think about what money you're going to make, because it's not a question of that. It's a question of survival and trying to maintain purchasing power. That's what it's all about.
Indeed. And wrapping up here, Egon, I've been calling this the year of no surprises. I don't know what other people are calling 2020, but my goodness, Egon. So now here we are on October 20th. Late October. What is on your radar the most? Is it the election? Is it, civil unrest and riots and looting in the streets? Is it Brexit? Is it the pandemic? Like what is one of the things that you got your eyes and your ears on and is concerning you as we come down the home stretch of 2020 here, Egon?
It's from that point of view, I'm pretty boring, and we are a long-term analysts of the world. And we are, risk analysts, if you want. We don't care about these short-term events. We know we have analyzed the situation. We are clear about the trend. We've been clear about the trend for the last 20 years in gold and silver, and nothing is going to change that. The election is not going to change it. Coronavirus is not going to change it. Coronavirus was just a catalyst. It wasn't the cause of the problems. It just happened to come at the time when the world was extremely vulnerable. And so that therefore, the good thing is, in my world, or the way we look at the world, election makes zero difference. Absolutely. Who becomes president makes no difference at all. It could have a 2-day effect one way or another, depending on who is elected. Not thereafter. Nobody's going to be able to change all these trends that I just outlined. No one is going to be able to solve the debt problem because it's insoluble, because it can never be repaid. It can never be restructured in a proper way without cheating. So therefore, it's so easy that we know that the trends are clear. Don't worry about anything short term. Don't worry about any news. Don't worry about any fluctuations in prices of gold and silver or currencies. We know the trends. Currencies are going to go to zero, more or less zero. Gold and silver are going to reflect that to levels that, as I said, we don't know what the levels will be, but if that much money is going to be printed, as I think, it's going to be at very high levels. But that's not real money. It's just protection against the debasement of the currencies. Just remember that, and don't worry a slightest bit about what's happening day to day, or what they say on television, or what the politicians tell you, because they'll tell you what they need to tell you. They'll be eternal optimists, and then they will be wrong all the time until they're thrown out, and then somebody else comes in and promises the earth again until he's thrown out. And that's what's going to happen. We're going to see a lot of change into the political scene in the next few years. Don't worry about any of that. Just worry about protecting yourself and your family. That's all, really. So it's very simple. You can just shut off the news, turn off the television, don't read the papers. It's whatever they say. These trends we're looking at, these longer trends, going to happen anyway. Whatever they say, whatever they do.
And that brings back that earlier thought that you said about just getting back to nature, and that sure does sound appealing right about this time. Egon, what's the best way for high net worth individuals to engage with Matterhorn Asset Management?
Well, you just come to our website, goldswitzerland.com, and they can fill in the contact form, or they can call us, and we give a personal service, and we're also have an affiliated company, which is we have a small stake in it, but they are also dealing with smaller investors and doing the same thing with us, as we are doing physical gold and silver in your own name with direct personal access outside the banking system. That's the only way to own it, in our view.
Egon von Greyerz, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Paul, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much.